Well, thank you very much. Let me at the outset thank ETCFO for inviting me here today to come and talk to all of you. What I will try to do over the next few minutes is talk about the role that CFOs are playing in today's world, particularly after the COVID period. I must say at the outset that I have a great sense of affinity towards CFOs, having been one close to 40 years ago. So I've been a CFO for nearly 40 years. Then last 10 years or so, I've been the CEO, but that apart. The role of a CFO in those days was so much easier than compared to what it is today. There was no real focus on issues like ESG, digitization, cyber-related concerns, and all the other areas that CFOs today need to focus on. Once a CFO, they say always a CFO. And even today, if you give me any sheet of paper which has numbers on it, it always gets me a little excited and start trying to put sort of numbers together. Let me come to the subject of my talk today, which is on the evolving role of CFOs in a post-COVID world. Understandably, it has been a challenging period for all of us over the past 3 years, as devastating and unprecedented non-economic forces have in some way reshaped the global economy. World over, CFOs have faced a whole barrage of challenges that they did not see coming, such as the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the Western sanctions against Russia, volatile markets, huge inflation, supply-side disruptions, high oil prices, and all the other stuff that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. On the positive side, in these volatile times, many CFOs have gained rich experience and have become battle-tested. The increased familiarity with the unexpected and the unknown has made CFOs more accustomed to dealing with new challenges. Successful CFOs have managed to use these volatile times to display their skills in the boardroom. Many CFOs have become more and more influential as a result. In fact, to take a step back, I would say that the last 10 to 15 years have not been an easy period for CFOs. With so many variables to contend with, the responsibilities of CFOs have extended far beyond the traditional job profile of a CFO. A CFO is today expected to be an advisor, a gatekeeper, a manager, a team leader, and a strategist all at the same time. The age when we could link economic activity with the performance of the corporate sector is probably behind us. The financial crisis of 2008 was the inflection point which threw all the known norms into disarray. The only certainty from the global headwinds is that volatility, black swan events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and geopolitical risks will keep throwing up new challenges to CFOs to test their perseverance. COVID-19 proved to be a very testing period for CFOs as they had to adapt to an unprecedented environment. It was an unsettling reality when uncertainty was the only certainty. The pandemic created disruptions that challenged the skills and ability of finance professionals on how to address such a crisis. With so many factors to consider, most CFOs prioritized the immediate concerns of the organizations and tried to find ways to tackle the situation. In India, when corporates recognized the gravity of the pandemic, treasury teams suddenly found themselves in a firefighting mode with the immediate focus on ensuring that there is sufficient availability of liquidity. Cash is king, and protecting the balance sheet were the mantras that almost all the CFOs needed to have to survive the storm. The COVID-19 crisis necessitated the shift to a virtual mode or remote operations. The success of working remotely depended heavily on the trust that CFOs had in their teams. During the crisis, successful CFOs ensured that they were able to maintain a constant line of communication with their team. As the economy started reopening, CFOs were able to determine the right balance between physical and virtual work locations. Further, CFOs had to rapidly revise all their financial plans and projections. The speed at which the crisis was unfolding required CFOs to use new tools such as scenario-based forecasting in addition to the levers that they traditionally had. In 2020 and 2021, CFOs had to consider their company's revenue guidance based on pandemic-related issues. The economic environment continues to be volatile, even in a post-COVID world with high global inflation and the impact of the ongoing war. According to an article by Wall Street Journal, CFOs are now factoring into their outlook the Russia-Ukraine war, the economic uncertainty, the high global inflation, and climate-related issues. As a result, CFOs are widening the range of their revenue forecasts and revisiting spending plans. CFOs are playing an important role as crisis leaders and are helping management make informed decisions for their companies. Past crisis situations and the pandemic have clearly shown how important it is for corporates to control the leverage that they keep in the balance sheet. It is a CFO's responsibility to determine the optimal amount of leverage. It is often said that leverage is a double-edged sword. It magnifies profits during good times, but amplifies losses in bad times. There is always a need to manage debt and keep costs under control, irrespective of the business cycle. I would like to lay emphasis on leverage and advise CFOs on 3 or 4 issues. Firstly, never ever ignore the perils of over-leveraging. When hard times come, there is a risk that your financial structure will quickly deteriorate and consequently the rating. This will leave the organization little or no access to debt markets. I would like to give you 3 examples: 2008-2009 during the global financial crisis, 2013 during the US taper tantrum crisis, and 2018 with the collapse of ILFS. During these periods, financial markets became extremely risk-averse, as you would recall, and the cost of funding, even for AAA-rated companies, rose sharply, let alone the weaker ones who had very little access to funding during those periods. Secondly, do not ignore early signs of distress. The earlier one recognizes the problem, the easier it is to resolve it. And thirdly, do not look for quick fix solutions. Short-term solutions are never going to get you anywhere. Long-term, you need to think long-term and do whatever is good from a long-term standpoint, even if it means that for a quarter or two, you have to bear the burden of the long-sighted policy you have. I would like to give an example of HDFC's funding strategies. We believe that adaptability is key and that raising resources is a very dynamic function. It is important to raise resources from a variety of sources and keep shifting those funding sources across different channels depending on economic conditions and depending on the interest rate environment. When there is uncertainty in the market, retail investors typically move away from riskier assets like equity and look for safer investments like deposits and bonds. We witnessed this trend during COVID-19 when we saw a massive inflow of retail deposits. After the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, we had made a conscious decision to ensure that deposits would always constitute at least 30% of our total borrowings. Though at times expensive compared to other sources of borrowing, deposits gives long-term stability. It gives a long-term, stable source of funding and is relatively immune to the vagaries of economic conditions. Let me come to ALM. I think ALM is a very, very important function that all CFOs need to work on, particularly in the financial sector. I would like to reiterate that in the financial sector, profits can be enhanced enormously by taking undue risks, particularly on the ALM front. This, however, creates volatility in earnings and creates a huge risk factor if at the time you're taking the risk and you have to replace your liabilities, interest rates shoot up or risk averseness increases in the market, then you cannot access funds. We have at HDFC, therefore, avoided ALM mismatches, whether it's on interest rate, whether it's on maturity, or it's on currency. Consequently, if you see, our spreads have always been stable. Matching assets and liabilities, both in terms of interest rates, maturity, and currency, are some of the challenges that the treasury teams face, particularly in these volatile times. There is a need to focus on long-term stability rather than maximizing treasury profits. Hedging strategy should be clearly understood. Several companies have burned their fingers, having inaccurately believed that they had devised a foolproof method of hedging. What looked risk-free in reality turned out to be filled with risks. As regards risk management, there are a number of new tools that have gained significance over the past few years. CFOs of companies that have come out well in recent years of volatility must be given a pat on the backs. Risk management has now become possibly the most important function of a CFO. CFOs have realized that risk identification is an extremely critical function. Risks can be both on and off balance sheet. In a nutshell, the risk framework must cut across all functions and across all hierarchies. Risk management is about preparing for an uncertain future. In the coming period, key considerations for CFOs, amongst other factors, will be cybersecurity, data protection, and legal compliance. CFOs now need to be prepared for resilience planning, which means addressing immediate risks as well as preparing their companies to weather any unforeseen crisis. Unfortunately, we are witnessing unanticipated shocks on a continual basis. The challenge for a CFO is to minimize the adverse effects of the external environment while also helping their organization carve out a clear path for future growth and profitability. Here I would like to mention that companies need to devise their own reporting mechanism and decipher for themselves what works best for them and for their boards. There have been instances when umpteen data-heavy files have been dumped on the board with hundreds of risk categories marked in red, amber, green, and just flagging of a risk to a board does not absolve a company in the case of a failure. The CFO, along with the CFO, has to ensure that certain risks get the focus and attention of the board and that the board is able to judiciously prioritize the risks. Overseeing compliance laws and regulations have become an extremely important function of the CFO. However, my personal advice is that at the same time, CFOs must be careful not to focus only on compliance so that it pulls them away from being a forward-looking strategist. Now let me come to the topic of ESG. ESG has somehow become a very important topic when you talk to investors today. The importance of ESG has grown in recent years and it is now becoming a critical component of risk management. Many CFOs are responsible for designing the mechanism for measuring, monitoring, and reporting the impact of ESG risks, as well as advancing social and diversity initiatives. Many CFOs are playing a key role in aiding senior management to align ESG with business strategies, which can lead to competitive advantage without being just a compliance compulsion. According to a global survey by PwC, 59% of CFOs have said that ESG and sustainability will be integral to long-term planning in the coming period. As one of the key stewards of the organization, CFOs need to identify the most relevant ESG items or ESG issues so as to safeguard their company in the long term. Investors need to feel confident on the accuracy, completeness, and reliability of a company's ESG reporting. It is a CFO's responsibility to ask specific questions to those providing ESG data within the organization to ensure that the information is transparent and reliable. In fact, ESG reporting by companies is now being closely monitored by a variety of stakeholders, including governments, shareholders, regulators, and customers. Finance departments have a key role to play in ensuring that the sustainability matrix provided to internal and external stakeholders are relevant and accurate and also support the overall execution of the sustainability strategy. While communicating with investors, CFOs should assist the investor relations teams to clearly address the company's ESG goals and develop concrete and measurable targets, such as reducing carbon emissions and increasing employee diversity within a given time frame. A transparent ESG strategy will signal to the investors that the company has taken steps to mitigate downside risks while potentially unlocking new opportunities. SEBI's Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report is a very good reporting requirement and is very rich, I would say, in quantitative terms. It is important that CFOs go through the report in detail and ask for clarifications if there are any doubts. The CFO must give a sign-off before the report is published. Let me now come to technology. COVID-19 accelerated several organizations' digital initiative. According to a survey by McKinsey, COVID ushered in rapid technology adoption that normally would have taken place over a period of 3 to 4 years. For instance, at HDFC, with the onset of COVID-19, physical interaction became impossible due to the national lockdown. We started focusing on digitization by laying emphasis on online processing. The digital investment has proved to be very fruitful. We are continuing to see the trend of digital onboarding, particularly with salaried employees. And for the 9 months ended December 2022, 94% of the new loans that we did were through the digital mode. Similar digital transformation has been taking place across many organizations. CFOs are leveraging new technologies to automate and streamline financial reporting. According to a global survey, at least 30% of the typical IT budget is wasted by companies in their journey towards digital transformation. CFOs need to carefully evaluate the costs and benefits of any large-scale digital investment. As technology continues to change and become sophisticated day by day, CFOs will be required to have a much greater understanding of how it is going to impact their businesses. Mobile banking, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, digital banking are changing the very face of how financial services businesses will operate in future. While the advent of online transaction, the systemic threat of cybersecurity risk is increasing as well. While awareness is growing, some CFOs are not sure if they have the information and tools at their disposal to handle the growing danger of cybercrime. I hear this regularly from people I talk to, and many CFOs continue to express their nervousness. They believe that they do not have the tools to be able to fight cybercrimes. How we tackle cybersecurity is still at a relatively evolutionary stage. It is said that the new war of the 21st century is most likely to be related to cybercrime. In fact, the World Economic Forum, in its Global Risks Report of 2022, has stated that malware increased by 358% in 2020 over the previous year, while ransomware increased by 435% in 1 year. It is also estimated that cybercrime will cost companies worldwide a projected US $10.5 trillion annually by 2025, up from US $3 trillion 6 or 7 years ago. Surveys have shown that a majority of CFOs have admitted that their companies do not have the capability that they need to be competitive in their digitization of business activities. Also, many CFOs feel that their companies are not fully prepared in terms of their cybersecurity capabilities. Apart from cyber-related frauds, CFOs need to be aware that companies are still vulnerable to traditional frauds such as diversion of money, financial statement frauds, intellectual property frauds, and so on and so forth. Hence, CFOs need to ensure that existing fraud risk management mechanisms need to be continuously updated and adequately reinforced. Let me conclude by saying that as we are witnessing strong economic growth in India, CFOs and senior management will need to conduct an honest review of their systems and processes that have carried their organization through difficult times. CFOs will need to learn from this experience and emerge stronger so that they are better prepared for the next crisis. Unprecedented challenges should not deter CFOs from their long-standing principles. For instance, shareholder value should never be seen in terms of an organization's ability to generate short-term profits, but should be judged in terms of its ability to manage all the factors which have a bearing on its long-term viability. A CFO needs to ensure strong financial health in the long term, which is essential for future growth. Often, short-term sacrifices need to be made in the interest of long-term stability. The task ahead for CFOs is challenging and exciting, given that the role of a CFO in an organization is gaining prominence day by day. Today, a CFO is a conscience keeper of the organization. Besides assisting in fulfilling the CEO's vision, he has to comply with the board's directions and, above all, be a strategic decision maker. As is aptly said, a CFO is skeptical in the face of exuberance, encouraging in the face of pessimism, cool in the heat of a battle. His job is to know the real story, and it is also his job to communicate it right to the investors. I wish all the CFOs present today the very best for these interesting times ahead. Thank you very much.